You're listening to Loughy and Savoca, a fantasy football podcast, episode 9. Dave Loughy and Matt Savoca at Draftaholic on the Twitters. Me at Loughy_D, LOUGHY_D. Breaking it all down. Football, the battles, not just at running back, because everyone talks about that. But what about the unknowns, the undecided, the uncertain target shares, workloads, snap counts, all of that good stuff. That's why Matt's here to break it down with me. What's going on, brother?
Hey, man, great to be here. And by the way, you had a great video that came out yesterday on the Stokastic Fantasy Football channel, breaking down sleeper players. But I thought you went a level deeper, a layer deeper there, and you talked about situations. And that kind of gave us the impetus to break it down even further, go into analysis here with these teams, because some of these teams are expected to be elite offenses, and we don't know how these target shares are going to break down. We could find like 20% target shares from some of the best quarterbacks in the NFL late in drafts this year. Are you kidding me? We got to break it down.
Yes, sir. And that's exactly what we're going to do. There's a lot of them too. And unlike many other seasons, this is why I'm so fascinated by it. Matt, this is actually why I wanted to do a video like that, was because it's so easy to just break down individual sleepers. But how many other years have we seen? Because I guarantee you the answer will be not many. How many other seasons in recent memory have we had situations like this where you have multiple elite quarterbacks, or at least quarterbacks who we've known to be elite over the years, that have completely questionable, and by questionable, I don't mean that all these players are going to be bad, but I mean uncertain target shares and favorite targets, whether it's Patrick Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers. I mean, those are two huge spots that I feel like are just being completely ignored because people take the approach of, well, I don't know, so I'll avoid them.
That is not the way to play it this year, especially with these first two teams, right? Well, you mentioned Patrick Mahomes right off the top. And if you've been playing best ball like at Underdog Fantasy over the course of this offseason, you know that these Chiefs have been very popular in certain drafts, and then people have been, it's hot and cold this year. You want to be hot on these wide receiver options. Now, I know there have been some injuries. We've got Mecole Hardman limping off the field in training camp. Even Juju Smith-Schuster had knee soreness, which is always concerning as well, but he's been the most impressive player at camp. Guys, the bottom line is this team threw 658 pass attempts. If you give Travis Kelce a ridiculous amount of them, say 150, there are hundreds of targets to go around here, and Patrick Mahomes is highly accurate and efficient with his passes as well. So players like Juju Smith-Schuster, assuming that knee is okay, Mecole Hardman if he's healthy, but Marquez Valdes-Scantling is skyrocketing up my board, and so is Sky Moore, late double-digit round players. Man, I'm just taking shots on these. Like, if you want to have like skinny stacks of Mahomes and two of his wide receivers late in drafts in your season-long fantasy league, not crazy this year.
It's risk-free, one might say. It's, in a sense, when you're getting them that late in the draft, you don't expect them to do well. And if they don't do well, you're fine. If they do well with Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback, you're in good shape. Let's dive into it. First up, though, hit that thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment down below. We love hearing from you guys. I respond. We respond, read all of them. And, of course, if you're listening in podcast form, subscribe and leave a review or a rating. All of that, preferably positive, but it's up to you. It all helps, and we appreciate it greatly in advance. Helps us keep the lights on around here, you know? So you mentioned just all of the vacated targets in some of these spots. With Kansas City, it is out of control. 260 vacated targets from last season. Now, of course, some of them were in lesser used, lesser integral pieces in guys like Demarcus Robinson, who was just cut from Vegas, and then Byron Pringle. But they made up over 100 targets. And then Tyreek Hill had 159 looks. He's now in Miami. That is 40%. 40% of Patrick Mahomes' total passing volume last year. Think about that for a second, Matt, and tell me that when people go, okay, so if I were to back up for a second, Juju Smith-Schuster appears to be the leader in camp as the wide receiver one, of course, behind Travis Kelce. You get the point. But that doesn't mean anything to me because, yeah, he's going around 6th round, and I think that's fine value on Juju Smith-Schuster. But when you're a guy like Patrick Mahomes, it's going to be top 5 in passing volume or more every single year, just lost 40% of the targets from the season before, there's going to be very good value to be found. And the greatest part is nobody's reaching on anyone outside. And I'm not saying you're reaching on Juju, but none of these guys are being drafted as players that could see 100 targets or more in a season with Patrick Mahomes as their quarterback. That's what blows my mind.
And volume means so much for fantasy football, and I think people look at that on the individual level all the time. At this point, when people are studying for their fantasy drafts, people are looking at touches or even expected fantasy points, especially if they've heard me talk before. But the volume of passes in a Patrick Mahomes offense is different than most other offenses in the NFL. They passed the ball 38.7 times per game, number 3 in the NFL last year. Now, if you say 40% of that target share is up for grabs, I would say that target share doesn't stay exactly equal from year to year. So there's some variance in there as well. So about 50 to 60% of the target share has some variance within the Kansas City Chiefs offense. That's 23 targets a game up for grabs for these players.
Crazy.
You could have 3 players average 7 targets per game. It could all work. Now, the most likely outcome is 1 or 2 of them work better. They score more touchdowns. That's the way it happens. But even Sky Moore, like in a season-long league, a second-round pick and a player that they have high expectations for, these are the types of bets that these asymmetrical bets where the upside is much higher than the draft investment. It's very rare that we get teams with quarterbacks this good with this much uncertainty on so much of the volume. The Chiefs are a very unique circumstance, and we need to spend time here. And you know what? Injuries create a lot of clarity here. So if Hardman is hurt, that's just adding to the probabilities that Smith-Schuster, MVS, and Sky Moore hit.
I forget who I was talking with about this, and it may have been you earlier in the week, but there was an article discussing how, in week 1, MVS, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, had, been picking Travis Kelce's brain because a lot of this Kansas City offense with Patrick Mahomes at the helm is improvised. And Travis Kelce earlier in his years with the Chiefs had asked Mahomes, like, how do you know where I'm going to be? And he always does. And Mahomes had pointed out that MVS has some of that in him as well, and made a play to move the chains in week 1 of the preseason on that opening drive with Mahomes. It's just one play, but it shows you that somebody like MVS, that let's not discount the fact that he played with Aaron Rodgers for several years. That's not a bad thing when you play with one of the greatest quarterbacks ever, who is perfectly capable of improvising. Now, of course, he's not a mobile quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, but we've seen Rodgers make miraculous plays time and time again. If MVS is able to have that kind of mind meld with Patrick Mahomes, it's going to take him a long way. He's a veteran player. He's played with a good quarterback. He's been in the league long enough. He has the speed. It seems like they're going to be using him in a lot of different places, though. And then Mecole Hardman is another one where you go, all right, got carted off the field. Looks like we have pretty good news. He suffered a groin injury, which they can be tricky, right? But yep. It looks like we've escaped anything really bad, and probably has a good chance of being ready for week 1. Mecole Hardman has been, I think you'd agree, Matt, underwhelming from a fantasy standpoint through his first 3 seasons, but he went from 40-some targets to 60-some and then 80-some targets, 83 targets last year. So we've seen that trajectory steadily trending upward, and now you have no Tyreek Hill. He's the longest tenured wide receiver in this offense. Both of these guys, to me, and it doesn't mean both of them are going to hit. Maybe neither of them do, but both of them at their current ADP have every reason for us to enthusiastically look at them and go, those are the type of players I want to take a shot on.
The bottom line is, I think 2 of these 3 are going to hit. I think giving Sky Moore more time right now in preseason is actually vital to him having chances of hitting early in the season. Because I think with the way that this lineup is, preparing to compete for a Super Bowl, first of all, in real football, and then has veterans like Travis Kelce, Juju Smith-Schuster, and MVS, it was going to take something, a little push, to get Sky Moore onto the field be fantasy relevant immediately. But now he's getting, plays out a lot. He's also getting these little shovel passes, these end around plays that they typically do in Kansas City. Suddenly, now we can cobble together enough volume for 3 of these players. And, if you were doing a draft last weekend, you probably could find 2 of these players in the 11th, 12th round, sometimes in home leagues that aren't too plugged in, maybe not drafted at all. I do think if there's more clarity on the injury news, Sky Moore moves up my board. MVS has always been high up there for me. Now, I will say this. I think MVS is one of those better and best ball players because I do think there's going to be some natural variance, more so than Smith-Schuster and Kelsey, who I believe have the target floor. But ceiling weeks from Patrick Mahomes, third wide receiver, I'm fine chasing that in my season-long fantasy leagues. It's the guaranteed touches for that 4th option that I didn't think was going to be viable that I now think Sky Moore could take over.
And again, that's assuming that you're calling MVS the 3rd guy?
I'm calling MVS the 3rd guy.
Right, the 3rd out. And I think right now that's a fair assessment. But we don't know. He could be the 2nd. Like, it looks like Juju, but we haven't seen a regular season game yet. I don't know. I'm not saying you're going to have those spike weeks like we saw from Tyreek Hill where you go for, 180 yards and 3 touchdowns. You could definitely see, 140 yards and 2 scores from MVS a few weeks this season. So I certainly get the best ball comparison there when it comes to MVS, but I just look at a team that has the 4th shortest odds to win to be the highest scoring team in the league.
Right.
And I see only 2 players going within the top 6 rounds, not to mention that they don't really have a quality run game to speak of at all. And it's not to say that they won't use them, but they're always going to be one of the most pass-happy teams in the league. The Kansas City Chiefs, for me, is one of those spots that if you want to take shots, if you're looking for sleepers that are low risk, very high upside, they are, in my opinion, the best spot to target. Now, the second best spot to target for me, and I'm curious to where you stand on this, for me, it is the Green Bay Packers because of the uncertainty.
Yep. I feel the same way. I feel like we're underrating the player who just won the MVP of the league 2 straight seasons because of how good Davante Adams is. Now, don't take anything away from Davante Adams. He's an incredible receiver, and this offense is going to look different. Now, did you hear something that happened out of training camp in Green Bay? First of all, the young receivers currently not up to Aaron Rodgers standards.
Yep.
No one is surprised by that.
They never are.
Yeah. You had a Tom Cruise on Mission Impossible set level rant about the receivers not being ready, which leads me to his other point that he made earlier in the week, which is that he thinks that he should get Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon involved in the pass game because you need to put your best 11 players on the field, which is something we actually said in a previous episode here. What if Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon become viable pass-catching options for Aaron Rodgers, and they have a much different looking pass offense, maybe a little bit more conservative, maybe Drew Brees as he entered his 40s level. So a lower ADOT for Aaron Rodgers, but more pass attempts for both running backs. What do you think of that?
Definitely think it's possible. Definitely. And of course, we already anticipate that being the case with Aaron Jones. One thing that you and I have talked about a lot over the past couple of months is what if A.J. Dillon also gets a lot of passing work? The notion or the misconception that he can't catch passes and he's only like a bruiser, a north-south downfield runner is nonsense. He caught 34 of 37 targets last year. He had 1 drop on the season. He averaged very nice yards per reception totals. I think A.J. Dillon could also be heavily involved in the passing game. And that's why I love the guy going in like the 6th round. But it's also not lost on me that you are similar to Kansas City. You are still vacating a ton of targets here as well, right? I mean, you're looking at 224 targets from last season between Davante Adams and between MVS. And if you look at this, it's 10.6 targets per game for Davante Adams among the games he played. I think he played 16, and around 5 for MVS. That is a lot of targets. So they can't all go to the running backs. There is no Travis Kelce in Green Bay either, which leads me to the next question. Is it Romeo Doubs, who is apparently well ahead of the pecking order and the depth chart than Christian Watson, which I think can be a little misleading because Watson was out with an injury for a long time, has time to work back. Will it be Alan Lazard, who has a long-standing relationship and a rapport with Aaron Rodgers? Who is it going to be that pulls away with this and becomes that guy? I'm not saying you're going to have a Devontae Adams-like season, but whether it's Greg Jennings, Jordy Nelson, Devontae Adams, none of them were first-round picks, Matt. Not a single one of them.
Yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't take a long time for Aaron Rodgers to build his trust with these mid-rounders, but this is Alan Lazard over his last 3 seasons. 13.6 yards per reception, 9 fantasy points per game. That's 2 seasons ago. 13.7 yards per reception, 9.8 fantasy points per game. Last season, 12.8 yards per reception, 9.5 fantasy points per game. Maybe he is who we think he is. Devontae Adams took notoriously a long time to break out within the Green Bay Packers offense. Part of that was Jordy Nelson being there. The other part that Adams really struggled with drops, concentration errors early in his Packers career. I'm not saying it's impossible for Alan Lazard to be the number 1 option, but I just have a lot of skepticism here. I think they're really looking for someone. And honestly, I'm worried about the Packers offense if Lazard isn't the guy. I know they paid him, and I know it's going to take some time for Dobbs and Watson to get on the field. And what can we really expect out of Randall Cobb at this point in his career? So, in a weird way, Alan Lazard becomes the linchpin of this Green Bay Packers offense. If he doesn't work, they need somebody to step up ASAP because, as you said, it can't all go to the running backs, even that if that is the quote-unquote best 11 right now. So I am a little bit worried, like the rest of the field is with Aaron Rodgers. My hunch, though, even though the numbers can't necessarily suss it out, is that Aaron Rodgers figures it out.
I mean, look, if you can sleep on a king-size bed, you're not going to willingly sleep on a cot, right? And when you have Devontae Adams there,
right,
Alan Lazard looks a whole lot less enticing as a pass catcher. So that's what I think is difficult to figure out. Like when Devontae Adams is there and arguably the preeminent receiver in football right now, do you really need to use Alan Lazard as much as you would in the event that Devontae Adams doesn't exist in Green Bay anymore? I think that's the question here, because last year Alan Lazard scored 5 of his 8 touchdowns in the final 5 weeks of the season, right? You know, he had 3 of those games were 5, 6, and 6 receptions. I thought the last quarter of the season, or the last third of the season, almost third of the season, was actually very promising for him. 6 for 75 and a score, and then he had a modest, underwhelming game against Baltimore. 2 for 45 and a score. 6 for 72 and a score. 5 for 75 and 2 scores in the final week. Like, those are not bad numbers for a guy that's playing alongside arguably the best wide receiver in the league. So I think Aaron Rodgers does have trust in Alan Lazard. And for someone that has clear trust issues with younger wide receivers, it isn't to say Doubs can't be that guy. It isn't to say that Watson can't be that guy. But I think the first crack at it clearly goes to Alan Lazard. And if you're grabbing him in the late 8th, 9th round, and you're telling me, like, all right, a lot of unknowns, I'm not sure. But Aaron Rodgers is still his quarterback. Aaron Rodgers has had 10 receivers in the top 6 fantasy points per game since 2008. So, the large majority of years. And now you have the chance to be the number 1 in this offense. And you've been in the offense for a while. And you closed out last season really strong. I do think there are some, and I agree with everything you're saying. Like, I'm not riding for Alan Lazard here. All I'm saying is I think there are enough positives for me to say 8th, 9th round value for who could possibly be the number 1 in Aaron Rodgers' offense. I will take chances on that.
It's absolutely fair. I mean, you could easily be like, there is so many ways to say this works for you as a 9th round pick compared to other 9th round picks. Now I have some favorites in there, but all of them as I've said in many fantasy football videos before, have warts on their profile. Otherwise, they'd be higher round picks. But man, I just want to take a moment as we talk about all the positives for Allen Lazard and how it really should work and should be different for him this year. I want to bang the drum for Christian Watson. It's going to take a minute, but this is a hyper athletic player.
Second round pick too, man. Let the trend continue.
Here's what I know analyst Matt Kajeski would say if he were here right now. Old prospect, played at an FCS school. Underplayed his athleticism. Might be a criticism you could say, because he's 6'4", 208, runs a 4.3, 640. Absolute freak of nature, 98th percentile speed score. The one thing you could say is he's never had more than 801 yards in a season in college against likely middling competition, but his offense, NDSU, didn't pass that much. He had a 90th percentile college dominator, that share of team yards and touchdowns. So I'm a little bit less concerned. I think the Packers drafted him to use him, and I know that the way that the modern NFL works, you draft the second overall player in the second round, you just end up trotting him out there at some point, figuring out what you get.
I don't have an issue with it. I mean, again, there's so many unknowns that you have to embrace it. Like, you have to embrace the unknowns in a spot like this. And if you're doing it with Watson, mind you, nobody's saying that Watson's going to be good this year. He could stink. So could Dobbs. But where are you drafting that? You have it should always come back to that question. Always. Like, every single time it should come back to, where am I drafting these guys? Well, I can tell you, you'd be getting Christian Watson as the 58th receiver off the board. 146 ADP right now. Romeo Doubs, you'd be getting at around 140 as the wide, 69th receiver. Where's wide receiver 69?
Yeah,
I mean, come on,
way down there.
Come on, they don't need to be good. You don't need to hit on them. That's all. Sorry, Watson's 147 ADP. Doubs is 190 right now, which I'm assuming in sharper leagues.
Yeah.
What?
I was going to say, in home leagues, some that are not plugged in again to the rookie scene will not even have them on the radar. Yeah. Like,
he'd be undrafted.
16th round.
All right. A couple other spots to hit on here that are, God, the Saints are pretty interesting. And the Titans, it looks like a mess right now. Before we do, though, just quick notes. We talked about Hardman already dealing with the groin injury. Other training camp news or / preseason developments that, just to keep you guys informed here. Kenneth Walker, Matt, or Ken Walker. Pete Carroll, obviously with the standard cryptic responses to this, where he says it's a little hernia thing, and then he's like, I don't know the severity. We want him ready for week 1. And then they go, the next day, he's going to undergo a procedure, but it's not a hernia thing. I have no idea what's going on with him, but it certainly makes me like Rashad Penny a whole lot more. And I already liked Rashad Penny a whole lot.
This is a situation where it's Penny's job to lose. He was excellent over the last part of the fantasy season last year, with Russell Wilson struggling in the passing game. We assume that whatever they trot out at the quarterback position, Drew Lock, Geno Smith, or maybe even the off chance by the time you're listening to this, Jimmy Garoppolo, it's probably not going to be hyper efficient, probably not going to be explosive in the pass game. And so he's going to have to outperform that situation. He did it last year. Now he just needs to stay healthy. I've already seen some soft tissue injury concerns this preseason. That's just the nature of the beast. Even if he weren't, someone who kind of carried that injury-prone label heading into this year, that would be a concern for a running back expected to get this much volume. But the bottom line is he's expected to get that much volume. I don't think Walker, his injury is supposed to be super serious, but man, I don't know. I don't think Pete Carroll is in any sort of rush to give Kenneth Walker extra touches here, and I don't think DJ Dallas is more than an average level player here. It's Penny's job to lose.
We saw that. Like, we saw Travis Homer and DJ Dallas. Homer was on that last year too, right?
Yeah, Homer as well, yeah.
Well, we saw them last year when Penny came back and got the lion's share of work in the final quarter of the season. Nobody else was touching the football. So, like you said, it's his job to lose. The health is obviously a concern, but eighth round, some leagues ninth round. And the way I see it is Penny is actually being drafted after backups or timeshare backs. Like he's being drafted after your Kareem Hunts. He's being drafted. And look, Kareem Hunt's good, but might be without Deshaun Watson all season long. So that offense could struggle too. And Nick Chubb's in front of him. And then he's gone behind like Tony Pollard. I like Pollard. You like AJ Dillon too. But just the thought of, hey, if this is an actual bell cow back going as the RB 33 or 34, yeah. And Ken Walker's dealing with some injuries. And then just very quickly, it looks like Zach Wilson should be good I'll let you hit on these by week 1 or at least week 2. And then Cam Akers dealing with what Sean McVay is calling minor. I guess it's worth mentioning, but I don't think we need to dig deep into any of that. The Ken Walker thing for me and Hardman are a lot bigger than those.
Absolutely. And I have a video coming out later this week, or maybe this weekend, actually, that's going to talk about a draft strategy that mentions almost all of these running backs, the healthy ones, in that video, and how there's a strategy, especially this year, that I think you can employ in your fantasy drafts. It's going to help people win a whole lot of money. Little tease there. With this news here for Wilson, I actually think it's a little cryptic. They said it was a success and there was no surprises. Like that doesn't mean
weird.
That doesn't mean he didn't have the surgery he should have as an athlete. Like I'm not going to pretend like I know everything about this meniscus surgery, but having played, even high school football, you hear the differences. There's the trim and there's the repair. The repair, you're going to be out for a series of months because the rehab is much longer, but you're expected to get back to your full athleticism. Even hyper athletic NFL players will choose to take the trim instead because you can get back onto the field typically in about a month, 6 weeks. So I think they wanted Zach Wilson to do that. What did Zach Wilson and his doctor actually choose to do? We don't actually know. They just said it was successful. I think we probably know if they ended up doing the repair at this point, it would probably leak, but we're really not sure. And honestly, the scramble ability of Zach Wilson goes down for me after he gets a meniscus trim in the same season. Absolutely. Even if he does come back, good for him. Tough guy. But we liked Wilson because he had a little bit of rushing upside, not because he was going to pass for 4 touchdowns a game. I think it means that players like Elijah Moore and Garrett Wilson need to move down your board. And maybe with Flacco in there for a couple weeks, you see Breece Hall. How about Breece Hall take over a little bit earlier than we expect?
Would love it.
Carter's going to get his touches too out of the backfield, though.
All right, on to some of this goodness or actually just deplorable sights that are coming out of some of these wide receiver cores like Tennessee. I mean, Treylon Burks couldn't have had a worse offseason, whether it was, being unable to create separation, and then it's like asthma and conditioning to injuries. And now he leaves the joint practice with the Bucs with a trainer yesterday. I don't know. What I can tell you is both of us actually have been banging the drum for Robert. I'm going off. You thought I was going with Burks here. I'm going with Woods.
For a minute, I was like, wow, he's really come around.
No.
He's stuck in his ways. That's what
yeah, very much so. Banging the drum for Robert Woods, in my opinion, only makes him more appealing because, if Treylon Burks just isn't ready, like as an NFL wide receiver yet, which just because Justin Jefferson did it and just because just because these guys did it, AJ Brown, doesn't mean in the rookie season that Burks is just going to come on as a star or even competent for that matter. Robert Woods has some clear question marks, but I see him going 104 overall. I see him going as the 43rd receiver off the board, which again means plenty of other teams have multiple receivers being drafted before Woods. And Ryan Tannehill's fine. He's a league average quarterback, slightly above maybe. They're going to run the ball a lot. But if Woods is the number 1 and I get him in the 9th or 10th, you can sign me up for that, especially with how Treylon Burks' offseason has been going. That's where I'm at.
All right, I'm going to say it. I think Treylon Burks has a great season. I think his ADP is being depressed. I'm not saying it's Jamar Chase where we get slapped in the face with how wrong we were with preseason expectations versus reality. But I think Treylon Burks is a player that is a difference maker when healthy. Now, one of the players he seems to remind me of early on in this process is Mike Williams of the Chargers, making spectacular grabs, but laying out in ways that I'm like, this guy's gonna get hurt all the time in little tweaks, little ways. Just, sometimes that is the way that it happens with these players. They just pile on injuries. That could happen for any player, but I think Treylon Burks is gonna have a really strong rookie year. And I think Ryan Tannehill is also going to have a bounce back season as a passer with Derrick Henry back behind him in the backfield. That offense running the way it's intended to be run. Now I'm in on Robert Woods at ADP. Usually you can find him outside the top 100 players in your draft. And man, like you mentioned this before, he was on the Rams obviously, but he was one of the top 12 wide receivers in fantasy football. In expected fantasy points per game, he was 17th. I actually think that's replicatable in Tennessee. A top 20 to 25 expected fantasy point per game performance. That's my expectation for him, and he's not being drafted there. If you're looking for wide receiver 1 overall upside, maybe he's not the perfect pick, but if you're looking at someone to outpace their ADP expectation, I think he's a smash. Hey guys, if you haven't heard about Underdog Fantasy yet, you are missing out. It is truly the best place to play fantasy football, and best ball fantasy football is a great twist on our favorite game. No waiver wires, no transactions, no trades. You just draft a team and win big prizes. And at Underdog, they've had so many great tournaments all off season long. The puppy drafts, that's just $5 entries. The Pomeranian drafts, just $3 entries. And the Best Ball Mania tournament, which has 3 different opportunities to win $1 million. And we've got a great offer for you over at Stokastic. If you use promo code Stokastic, Stokastic, you will get a first match deposit bonus over at Underdog up to $100. And the gifts don't stop there. At Stokastic, we'll give you the free best ball rankings and draft kit, including our fantasy football rankings for all platforms and scoring. Absolutely free. A $70 value, absolutely free with promo code Stokastic.
One of the teams that I don't hear talked about a lot, just in terms of obviously there are a couple of guys that are getting a lot of buzz in camp. One of them, I'm referring to the Saints, by the way, and Michael Thomas, who appears to be back to his peak. If he's back to his peak form, and Dennis Allen, of course, he's gonna hype him up. But if he's back and you've got Alvin Kamara back, and then Jameis Winston is just good enough, that's already going to make a pretty damn good offense. But how do you value a guy like Thomas? Because in all of these seasons past, you might have had Emmanuel Sanders or something and still Kamara, but now you bring in Jarvis Landry, you draft Chris Olave, and I'm sure some of this was protection against hey, what if Michael Thomas doesn't come back or isn't the same guy? Now they kind of have an embarrassment of riches there with the early mid first round draft pick, a great possession slot guy in Landry, Thomas, and one of the best pass catching running backs in the league in Alvin Kamara.
I mean, this is how you make an offense from a skill position standpoint. Yeah. Absolutely. So they lose a key offensive lineman. That hurts certainly for the Saints and for Jameis Winston, who's coming back from a pretty serious injury himself. But as we said earlier in the show, volume is king in fantasy football, and there are more volume concerns with Jameis Winston as a Saint compared to Jameis Winston with the Buccaneers. He didn't throw that much at all. And if there are going to be 4 quality receivers, you usually need a serious amount of volume, like we were talking about with the Kansas City Chiefs at the beginning of the show. 23 passes a game, you cannot have 4 fantasy relevant wide receivers. Or if they do, it's the worst case scenario because they're all splitting days. One player gets a great target share one day and then they're just down to 0 the next. That's horrible for season-long fantasy football. I think Kamara is safe in terms of floor and ceiling. And I think Thomas, honestly, if healthy, is the next safest. And that means Landry or Olave are fantasy relevant to me, not both. And if you only told me that there was one fantasy relevant New Orleans Saints player, I would tell you it's because Jameis Winston didn't pass enough to make the others worthwhile.
I think that's a reasonable take. I do. And Michael Thomas, after 2019, was the clear wide receiver 1. He was a clear top 5 draft pick in any league. Right. And now he's 73rd. The landscape looks a lot different in this offense. Make no mistake about it. There's no more Drew Brees, who was on his way out anyway, but could still find ways to get Michael Thomas the ball. This is a different football team. But if he's healthy, and he is close to what we saw in 2019, I think it's 73 overall as the wide receiver 31. Well worth taking shots on because he's being drafted around Amon-Ra St. Brown. St. Brown was great to close out the season, but he's still on the Detroit Lions.
Right.
You know, they still added some weapons. They have an early draft pick that they're bringing on who should be good after a few weeks into the season. I don't know if DJ Shark's any good, but you have a pass catching back in DeAndre Swift. You get the point. But the offense shouldn't be as good as the Saints. And Michael Thomas, when healthy, is a proven commodity. So if I'm drafting him around guys like that or another unknown and Clyde Edwards-Helaire or after Dallas Goedert, yeah, I'm okay with that. Now, the New England Patriots, on the other hand, I mean, last year, it's no surprise that Damian Harris had 600 rushing touchdowns. They love to run the ball. Ramondre Stevenson got a lot of work. Mac Jones, give him credit as a rookie. He performed admirably and got them. They got into the playoffs and got shit on by the Bills, right?
They did. They
right?
made it
Okay.
in.
Yeah. It's hard for me to remember that far back. Jacoby Myers, one of those guys. We had has he scored a touchdown counter, every single week. No, finally got one. But again, an underwhelming season in that respect. Is there anybody here from Bourne or Devontae Parker or Myers that you want to target this year as a sleeper?
Hear me very clearly. No more than one Patriots skill player, because the mouths to feed argument is absolutely in play here. But nobody cares about this team, Loughy. It's like there's 31 fantasy relevant teams, and then the Patriots are somewhere else in some minor league stadium.
And they'll still win like 10 games, too.
And Mac Jones, as a rookie, was a serviceable real-life quarterback. And people who are serviceable from an efficiency standpoint sometimes turn into way above average quarterbacks in their second, third, and fourth year in the league. People are playing this like there's no chance that happens in fantasy drafts. The bottom line is there is some chance. And I think players like Myers or Bourne or even Devontae Parker, who have actually been kind of decent on a per route and per target basis, could become relevant, especially if the touchdowns, which all went to Hunter Henry last year, get more spread out.
Before we wrap this up, I'm just about to put a bow on this, and we got news. As we're recording this right now, we're releasing this Friday, but we're recording it on Thursday. Deshaun Watson officially they've settled on this one, and 11 games, $5 million fine, which means that he's missing approximately 64% of the season. So essentially 2/3 of the season. He's set to return in week 13. So assuming they have any chance in a very tough AFC North of being in any bit of contention, you'll get the final 6 games out of Watson.
Do you know where they are in week 13, Cleveland?
Where are they?
At Houston.
Ah, that's interesting.
So that'll create some
good matchup.
I mean, look, the guy's going to probably score 20 fantasy points a game for you the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season. From a fantasy relevance standpoint, this is really difficult. Really depends on if your league allows suspended players in IR, because I know some platforms do. But sitting on your bench for that long, that's tough. I will say this. In deeper benches, it's probably worthwhile because the likelihood of him being fantasy relevant once he gets onto the field is 100%. That's the times that you want to take chances on having burning a spot on your bench for those 12 weeks, right? But it's still a lofty thing to overcome because you don't get a churn spot, which is very valuable in waiver wire leagues.
And I don't really feel like wasting 11 weeks on the bench for a quarterback either.
Maybe in a 2 quarterback league, it's a different calculus.
That's different.
Yeah,
that's different for sure. For sure. In a single quarterback league, if you have a small bench, I think that's a very tough ask to have 11 weeks burned for Deshaun Watson to come back in week 13. If anything, and maybe someone will do it. If anything, just pick him up in like week 10 or something if you have somebody to drop and then keep him for a few weeks there. But there it is. 11 games, $5 million fine. Probably better than he expected after we found that Roger Goodell and the NFL had challenged that
Yeah.
that initial ruling. So that's it, Matt. They can follow you where, and what do you got going on?
You can find me on Twitter at Draftaholic, especially as the season starts. I'll start tweeting out so many more of my insights as we get closer. But I am here all the time on the Stokastic Fantasy Football channel, the Stokastic Best Ball channel as well. We're doing player profile shorts over there that are getting a lot of traction. And of course, me and you will be back on the DFS channel very soon, breaking down every matchup for week 1 before you know it.
See you next time.